Welcome everyone. It's time, and it's also a pleasure to welcome you to the Great Futurological Congress. It's the third day of the Congress, so it's not the end yet. We have 2 days to come, but it's in the middle of the path that we are taking to the future. We are almost there. The future is, we can see it on the horizon, but we still need a little bit, I would say, guidance maybe to navigate the path of uncertainty that waits us before we reach the end. Is it a future or is it something else? We will see in the end. But yeah, and it's also great to introduce our new discussion and talk that maybe helps us to navigate in this uncertain path to future. So yeah, without further ado, I will give the floor to our speakers, and it's really nice to welcome in the Great Futurological Congress, Julia von Lucadou.
Which one?
Did you want to sit?
Thank you, dear delegates. We are honored to have been given this podium at the Futurological Congress, and it is always nice that we talk about the future with writers, because we frequently see many people who think they have recipes about the future, about the present, people like politicians, people like tech visionaries, and we forget that their visions sometimes are quite limited. And so it is nice to open the space with people who have exercised their imaginations and allow us to think of better futures. Because one of the things that we frequently see is that our imaginaries are limited. We want to dream big, but our dreams end up being very small. So this is where we're going to go with this conversation today. Before I go any deeper, I just wanted to make a commercial announcement. Julia has been translated into Estonian. We are going to be speaking in English because of my limitations, linguistic limitations. So I do not have a German to talk, so we are going to speak about the English translation of the novel. Julia is going to share some of the English translation in reading. But if you want to also get her autograph at the end of the day, there are copies of the Estonian translation outside. So that's the commercial announcement now. You can buy your own very personal copy of Academia, where the translation was published, and you will have a doubly unique opportunity of getting the autograph of both the writer and the translator. So this is the end of the commercial announcement. We will now go to the content. But remember, Julia has agreed to do the autographs, and we will leave space for that. We have planned this conversation in the sequence of conversation between us. So we have question-response sequence. Julia will read some things, we'll do some more questions, and at the end we will leave space for questions from you. So do keep on thinking about them. I know that very many of you are Estonian. If you know that I know who you are, I'm going to point my finger at you eventually if nobody else asks a question. But your feedback is going to be very welcome. So we'll factor that in. Okay, so let's get started with our part of the conversation. I'm a middle-aged scholar, so it seems to me that we live in a strange time, that in some ways it's a time in which some hopes have run out. At least in this part of the world, it seems that a certain optimism has gone missing, and we kind of seem to be suffering from a crisis of the future. In other words, we are frequently unable to think of better futures. We seem to be very stuck in the now. And it seems to me, therefore, that we have very many dystopias in the world. Almost too many dystopias and no utopias. How does it seem to you?
Well, I agree. There has been a trend of dystopian literature and also series, films, a lot of games, computer games that have this dystopian vision. But I wouldn't agree that it's because of a lack of hope. I actually think, I can speak for myself, but also maybe for other authors, the reason you write a dystopian novel is not because you've lost hope, but exactly because you have hope there can be change. So you want to think about the future in a way that would be critical, that would make people feel sort of your own anxieties about what could happen if we continue on the path we're on. Sort of certain developments you see in society, and then you hope that by reading this dystopian vision, we can all work together and change this path. So my own idea of this novel came out of having experienced some dystopia myself in my own private life, and it was actually quite healing to sort of exaggerate it a little bit for this book to make it into a world that was a little bit different from my own, went a little bit further, and then to see how many people identified with my uncomfortableness, discomfort with this vision, and how many people agreed that there are things we can change right now to have that not happen. You know, there's many things on the horizon that are easily preventable.
So what can a dystopia do? You know, what are its affordances, to use a fancy word?
I feel maybe I can only speak to myself, but I have this sort of philosophical idea about dystopias. It really gives you space, a lot of space to think about the world and to think about humanity, what makes us tick, what are our abilities, what are the disabilities, what are we doing wrong, and to really dive deep into the problems you see, maybe also philosophical, ethical problems, particularly in this book. I think there were a lot of ethical concerns I had that sort of found its way into the book. And I saw it a little bit like going into a laboratory and creating these characters, putting them in this world, and then seeing what happens. You know, what does it do? What does this world do to people? My book is sort of based on psychology. It has one of the main characters is a psychologist, and we see this world from her point of view. And I come from a psychological background. I didn't sort of officially study it, but I grew up with two psychologists as my parents. And so I grew up amongst books of psychology. I loved reading them as a young child. And they do these experiments and they see how people react. And it's just so fascinating to me how contradictory humans are. And so I think dystopias especially can dive into that contradiction and see what happens if we put a lot of pressure on people.
So it's a psychology experiment with paper people.
Exactly. They tend to feel very real to me at some point, so yeah.
So how, to be effective, how different from actual reality, whatever that is, quotation marks, does a work of fiction have to be sufficiently scary but not too scary?
Like, that's a very good question.
To what level of estrangement is necessary to have this right dose? Like, you know, with horror, so that people wouldn't close their eyes.
That's a good question. I think it would be sort of depending on the person. Everybody has a different tolerance. I myself am very easily scared. I don't watch horror films for that reason. It's too frightening for me. But I think to me, the most interesting horror is something that's very close to my own experience. So if I can find myself in that world, if I see a character acting in a certain way that's, you know, detrimental to the character, and I suddenly think, oh, I've done that before, that is very scary in a very personal way. And I think my book is very, very close to our reality. A lot of the things that are in the book already exist, especially the technology. There's no technology in the book that is invented. It's all already existent or could exist, maybe not exactly in that form. And there are some parts that are sort of further along. So it's not a coherent sort of setting in the way that this is exactly 100 years from now. I actually didn't know I was writing a dystopian novel when I started. I was just writing about my own experience. And because I had come out of a burnout, crisis, depression, which had a lot to do with the society I lived in, the performance society, the capitalist idea of humans being reduced to the value of their productivity, of the money they made. I had this, sort of dystopian feeling within myself. I thought, how have I gotten to this point where all my identity was reduced to my productivity? And I actually worked myself almost to death, you know. I was broken from by my own doing, out of an ideology that had something to do with my coworkers, with my bosses, but with the broader society I grew up in. And so I wrote about that, and I realized with certain ideas, I wanted to go further. I thought, oh, this is interesting. I want to think it through. For example, in the book, there are no family systems anymore. A lot of people are born artificially, and the few people who are born by real people, they are either considered an investment, so very rich people can afford to have children, and they see them as an investment. They want to see returns. They want the children to be very successful. They put a lot of pressure on them. Or the reason why they don't have children anymore, most of the people, is because they can't afford it economically, but also time-wise. All their time is allocated to work, to being productive, and so having a child that's chaotic, that's creative, that sort of challenges you every day would take you out of productivity. So that's definitely not something that already exists. I feel maybe a tiny bit of recognition sometimes when people tell me about the achievements of their children and list the achievements instead of telling me what their personality is like. But I don't think we've come that far. And there it was just also really fun for me to be creative and invent something that's not there yet. Mm-hmm. But other things are very real. Sometimes I was surprised. I thought I had invented something, and then it turned out it was already existent. For example, because of this lack of family, people have a longing for a familial relationship. They're very lonely people, very isolated people. Friendships are also reduced to professional communication. And so they have this longing and this lack of closeness. And so this industry starts up, a sort of underground industry, where you can experience a real so-called bio-family, how it used to be, in your own home by renting people who play your family, your father or your child or your sister or brother. And I thought I had come up with this, but then it turns out I read an article in the New Yorker that in Japan that is already a reality. People actually rent other people to play their family, to play their boyfriends and girlfriends. There was a very touching article where a woman had rented a father for her daughter because of the societal sort of image you have to keep up, that you have the perfect family, and the child actually didn't know it wasn't her real father until she was, I think, a teenager. And it was just so tragic to me that, you know, that we could become so reduced to our functionality, to be like almost robot-like, you know, and lose the things that make us human, which is closeness, which is chaos, which is...
Okay, very rich answer there. Yes, so I'm breaking it up into 3 further questions. I'm going to take it in different directions and take some elements of this response. And the first one is then, you know, that thing that you mentioned, that you picked things that are in the world and maybe already exist. Nothing is fantastic, and in particular the surveillance capitalism part, that we are living in a society where we know that we are always monitored.
Yeah.
Not necessarily for anything evil, but we know that this is happening in this room to most people who own who are wearing any kind of wearable tech. We are all being monitored. And to me, that always has been one of the scary things, how fast this has happened and how voluntarily we have done this. But what scared you about surveillance and the kind of that all-pervasive surveillance system that you have conjured up? What's most scary for you?
Most scary. I think the scariest part about it is the self-surveillance. It's a big part in the book as well, and it's something that I recognized in myself. We have all these measuring devices around us. We're measuring how many friends we have, how many likes, how many followers, how many steps we take every day, how our heart rate is, how our sleep is. And we use it to compare ourselves with others. And it's sort of like a competition amongst us, and it motivates us. It also has a positive effect of wanting to do better. But to me, what's scary is that I'm also in competition with myself. I look, what did I do yesterday? And I want to do better. And that's that capitalist ideology. Everything has to grow all the time. It's not enough to be stable.
So it's not just on the one hand that it's the Foucauldian docile bodies that we have all become the guardians. We no longer need a prison guard. We guard ourselves. We monitor ourselves. And then there's this self-optimization part, which is monetized.
Yes, and it also has a lot to do with control, with like controlling ourselves and controlling our image, because it is sort of in tandem with social media, where we present ourselves every day, and we have to make it perfect, we have to make it convincing, we have to make it attractive, and I think it's sort of all mixed in together. And my main character, Hitomi, the psychologist, is this very, very controlled person who's constantly checking up on herself, seeing her ratings at work. You know, her boss gives her ratings every day, how she's doing in competition to her coworkers. But she also checks, how did I personally do yesterday, how did I sleep? And then she feels bad that she didn't sleep, and then she can't sleep because she feels so bad about not sleeping well.
So we should ask everybody in the room now, how many steps did they do yesterday? And do a little board behind us so that we can find out who the winner is. Because, I mean, who are we doing this for? In the novel, there are, reasons why people do it. It's very clear incentive system. You don't do this, you're fucked at work. But for most of us, I mean, the number of steps, at least my employer, I hope, does not know. But, why are we doing this? Who are we performing for?
Well, we're being we're being seduced by the idea of health, right? It's sort of, it's being taught to us that this is an idea or like an element of care for others, but also of self-care. Self-care has become a very important term. And it's very big in on the internet, right? It's a huge industry, the self-care industry, the wellness industry, and it takes something that is very positive, which I agree. Of course, we should be kind to our bodies and treat them well, and know what's good for them, and sort of try and like do our best to be happy and healthy. But I think that in the way it's being taught to us, it has become part of that competition, and then it's not actually healthy anymore. A good example is, I read for the book, I read a lot about Silicon Valley and big tech companies and their structures and the way they think about the world. And in Google, there was a guy who started as a computer programmer, who rose up within Google and became this sort of guru within the company, because he had found out that mindfulness training, meditation, yoga, made people more productive. And so he became this guru and gave mindfulness seminars and gave yoga sessions, because then people would work even more and even better. And that is the opposite of what mindfulness is supposed to be, right? Like, that's sort of turning it on its head, but we don't notice. Like, it sounds so positive and so good. One thing that really angers me every day is how we body shame others on the internet. And we always say, it's just because of your health, right? We want you to be healthy. We're doing this out of care for you, which is, of course, a lie. It's clearly just to make themselves feel better in this very horrible way. But also, it's just not true that thin bodies are healthier bodies. Like, there's so much misinformation built into this ideal of the healthy body. And Riva, my second character in the book, the high-rise diver who gives the book the title, you can see her here on the cover. She is an athlete, and she does this sport, high-rise diving, which is a sport I invented, but almost already exists. And she is famous. She's a star because of her perfect body, right? She has her body under such control that it's the ideal woman, the perfect age, the perfect look. She has control over every little muscle in her body, and I feel that is the picture of health we have, but it's not a healthy picture. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so in some ways, it's the good old, feminist sociology knowledge that women's magazines have known for 100 years, that women's bodies always need fixing, and the beginning is to make people feel insecure. About their bodies and how they function. And so nowadays we have taken it to a higher level of optimization. It's no longer just that I'm aware of my fat and my wrinkles, but I also become aware that my sleep patterns are not good, and I have not meditated enough, and my downward facing dog is very good, but there are some other positions that I have not achieved. But there's more guilt about more things that we have not yet perfected as an enterprise.
And it has become more inclusive. Now we also hate men's bodies. Right. We hate transgender bodies. We are very inclusive in our hate of...
Because we can sell insecurity back to people.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, that's I would say a message that is inherently that we are speaking about a system that doesn't produce happiness, but produces insecurity.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's the kind of a big recipe of neoliberalism and consumer capitalism in general. It first of all needs to make you feel bad, so you would buy stuff to feel less bad.
Exactly.
But you haven't made the commercial side really central. You're mostly looking at the self-optimization side, and I therefore was thinking about this sense of anxiety that to me is the dominant emotion of contemporary capitalism.
Yeah.
That we know that the world is precarious. We know that there are losers around us. And we are so afraid that
we are them.
We will be losers if we don't work harder, if we don't work on our bodies, on our minds, on our performance at work. So sport is one area where you see people really proving that, I'm not a loser, I'm one of the winners. So what do we do in this world of anxiety? How do we change this? Maybe you can become the guru and work for Google instead of sitting here.
See, the great thing about literature is that you never have to give answers, you only pose questions. And then the readers have to give the answers. Because it's not so easy to give one answer. That's also a reason why sometimes people ask me, why don't you write utopias instead of dystopias? And I think it's almost impossible to write a utopia because it's a team effort. Like you cannot, as a single person, you cannot say what's best for everyone. You don't have that ability. And I feel the same goes to answering these questions. I could give my personal opinion, but I think we have to collectively think about it with all the people from all walks of life, as they say in English, to actually come up with a solution that applies to everyone. Because I live in my own little bubble. I'm not aware of everybody else's struggles and challenges. So, yeah, for me, it's very difficult to answer it as a single person.
So your task is basically make us recognize our own anxiety in the text.
Yes. And
realize that, well, that's sick.
Exactly.
And the next thing, why am I doing this, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I can give you an answer. What I personally learned through writing the book and through my own life experience is one thing I noticed about the world we live in is this perfectionism, right? That goes with mental health and the perfect body, that we have sort of gotten rid of or are trying to get rid of, because it's almost impossible, negative emotion, uncomfortable emotion, like fear, like sadness, like anxiety. We see it as something pathological. As soon as a teenager is anxious, they say, I have an anxiety disorder. It's not, but it's normal to be anxious as a teenager. It's also normal to be anxious in the world we live in. And an adult, exactly. It's actually a pretty rational response to the world, especially for teenagers who have, when I was 16, I didn't know anything about the world. I didn't know there was, everybody was dying. Now you know it every day. You look at your phone and you realize, oh my God, people are in wars, dying, being raped. There's climate change, which is threatening our very lives. There was pandemics threatening everyone. I feel it's rational and a good instinct to be anxious about it, right? And so I feel we have to be more open to uncomfortable emotion and recognize it as something positive. It's actually trying to help us, see the problems that we're facing and actually deal with it. Yeah.
So that, like your dystopia, sort of comes back to many things like people before, like Huxley in his Brave New World, says that I want to be unhappy. I want to claim the right to be unhappy in the world as well, where happiness is compulsory, right? That kind of a sense. But you have chosen as your protagonist somebody who is a star athlete, and sport is one field in which performance is so obvious in some ways, like high level performativity, perfection, spectacularity almost. And so in some ways that the fall, in her case, she's performing while falling. It seems very tempting image in some ways. Did you choose that consciously? That, an athlete whose success depends on falling really well?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of my writing, I think a lot of these ideas in my writing are subconscious. And I always love readers pointing them out to me and saying, oh, I saw that you did this. And I think, wow, you're smarter than me. Like you read it into the book. And so I don't actually know if I was aware of it while I was writing. I am aware of it now, but maybe because someone has told me. It is sort of, maybe I should describe the sport. I could actually read a passage
exactly,
where
that's what I was thinking, that's a good place.
And then speak about sort of what it means to me. Where we see Riva for the first time performing her, actually for the only time, performing her, because maybe I should mention, the story starts when Riva, one of the main characters, this star athlete, has actually stopped performing. She has fallen into what I would call a depression. She's staying at home, not doing anything, lethargic. And Hitomi, the main character who tells the story, is a psychologist tasked with finding out why she stopped performing and fixing her and bringing her back into the market. Because of course there's many investors who have paid for who are invested in her performing well, and her coach is invested in it. So they pay this woman, this company she works for, to fix Riva and to make her jump again. And what I'm going to read is actually I'll read it from the digital version. It's more appropriate for this topic. No. But so the book starts out with the prologue, which is sort of addressed to the reader. And it draws in the reader. It's a little bit of a commercial for this world, an advertisement. You're flying with this woman, and you're experiencing this ecstatic feeling of falling and rising up again. I'll start maybe at the beginning of the prologue and then jump to Riva's jump. Imagine the world. Imagine the globe floating in space. From your vantage point, the world is round and smooth. Enjoy its uniformity. Imagine that it exists only for you. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath in and out. After a few seconds, open your eyes again and consider the earth anew. Now zoom in a little closer. You can make out irregularities in the evenness of the Earth's surface, elevations and depressions. They form a soft, undulating relief. The shifts from red to blue to brown create a mottled pattern. As you get closer, a silver fleck stands out against this earth-colored display. What you see here, from afar but steadily approaching, is a city. It glistens because it is made of glass and steel. You can see that now. The city lies beneath you like a secret waiting to be revealed. So zoom in at ease. Don't be shy. You're allowed to look. And now we're seeing a woman standing on a high-rise building, very, very high up. And this woman is now stepping forward onto the ledge. The audience holds its breath as the woman steps to the outermost edge of the flat roof. She has a supernatural shimmer in her fly suit. The people on the ground and in the viewing boxes on the opposite building reach their arms up towards her. What you're experiencing is a physical manifestation of euphoria. It pulsates between the buildings. Close your eyes, let it infect you. Feel what's happening inside you. Feel it down to your fingertips. Feel your heart throbbing as the feeling spreads throughout your body. When you open your eyes, the woman is diving head first from the skyscraper roof. At first, you're scared. Your body tenses up as if it were falling beside her. But then you see the diver as a bird in flight. You feel her absolute certainty that she will be able to withstand the fall. You follow the falling body, stay close to it. You see how it rotates around itself with perfect precision, first horizontally, then vertically, twisting into a ball and then stretching out again within fractions of a second. In the next moment, you see the ground. It fills your field of vision. You hold your breath. She is plummeting towards it, threatening to crash. The hot, sun-drenched asphalt is already palpable when her body suddenly shoots up, lifted by the fly suit's flight mode, triggered at the last possible moment, fractions of a second before impact. You can hear the air being released from the open mouths of the audience, a collective exhale. The crowd applauds. The diver shoots like an arrow into the sky. In flight, she smiles into the cameras, a weightless figure. Imagine how this woman feels, falling into the depth with unwavering certainty, knowing you will take flight again, without any fear of impact, of obliteration. You enjoy defying gravity. Death can no longer harm you. What a feeling, weightlessness. What a sublime feeling. Now, back away again. Zoom out slowly, carefully, without shaking, so that the movement remains pleasant to the eye. Imagine that the body between the buildings rises and falls again and again, even when you can no longer recognize it as a body, when it's just a spot in motion, then a point, a possible pixel error, and then nothing at all. You zoom out and see the globe floating in space again, uniform and calm. Imagine the body in its eternity, immortal, its continuous rising and falling like a breathing, like a pulse. Savor this thought. Take refuge in it. Draw confidence from it. Now, in this moment, as you slowly withdraw from the world, there is no death, only life.
Thank you. And in particular, thank you for this wonderful reading. But it still, makes me think that my own reading experience of that scene, when I thought that, yes, this is this perfect image of today's world in which we all know we will fail. And somebody will tell us that as a phoenix, we will lift, instead of like crashing into that kind of perfect suicide moment, we too can be like phoenixes.
Exactly.
Like she's the ultimate dream of the society where, failure is a norm, in which we have been given these impossible standards of success that we will never be able to emulate. That
Exactly.
This is taking it to another level.
And what she's doing is exactly that. You can never do it yourself.
You need a suit.
Exactly. And also, it's enormous risk, right? Most people, we find out in the book, who practice the sport die because they don't use the fly suit in the right way. It's a very risky sport. And I took the inspiration from base jumping, which is very similar, only that you can't fly up again. Because it fascinates me that very young people risk their lives for this adrenaline, for this feeling of control, absolute control, of flying, right? Of being sort of above the world. And it's also sort of the logic of the market. You have to be willing to take very high risks, to sort of also work yourself to death, to then get high rewards. That's the promise. Of course, we see in the book, most people do not get the rewards. It's a false promise, but it's very seductive. Yeah.
And hence I was thinking, in parallel with this, it's tempting to think of the work of Jack Halberstam and his celebration of failure, that we should, in this world that sends us all these impossible standards of success, embrace the pleasure of fucking things up, of, losing occasionally, because otherwise the success system will just reproduce the near-death experiences from which, we will wake up and begin another day.
Yeah, he would be banned in this world. Yeah, nobody would allow him to speak.
I also wondered, when we talk about the text as a work of fiction, the choice of point of view is very important, and you are allowing the reader to step into the role of somebody who is a surveiller to some extent, who is the kind of an agent of the system. Yeah. But on the other hand, also a victim of the system. Exactly. So how did you choose this as our narrator? Because, in a text whose eyes we see things through shape the way in which we feel to some extent.
Exactly. I mean, that's what's great about literature, that you, as a reader, you can really get very close to the protagonist. You can sort of live in their skin and feel their feelings. And for me, writing these characters, it's the same, right? It's almost like acting. I go very deep into the characters. And I was very interested in a person who is very much part of the system and is very convinced of the ideology as a main character, because it's a little bit uncommon, especially in science fiction literature. We usually have the protagonist as the hero who breaks the system, which is very easy to identify with, right? The rebel, the hero.
We want to believe that we're the rebel.
Exactly, we want to be.
Because we will go home and watch the same TV show and go shopping, but, but we want to believe for a moment that we could be the hero. Yes.
But I find it much more realistic to actually get into the feeling of somebody who's part of that world, who believes in it, but who's always also being kept in that world. And it was so interesting to me, the mechanisms in which that keep her in there and that make her think that she's doing the right thing and that make her believe in it. It's actually quite a sad feeling because she's suffering a lot. She's also a young woman like Riva. It's her first big break, her first big case, and she's under enormous pressure to fix Riva and get her back on track. And she doesn't manage to do it, especially in the beginning. She tries different things. She mostly analyzes her data, of course. She has access to almost anything that was ever recorded about Riva, to her diaries, to everything possible, and she goes through this data and tries to understand her, which of course doesn't work, and because she cannot understand that anyone who's that successful would throw that away, because that is the big problem. She believes she can be that successful. She always wanted to be a high-res diver as a kid, and she still believes she can be a star, and so it's very threatening to her to actually understand why somebody would choose not to do that. And so for me, that perspective was much more interesting, psychologically, and also in understanding humans and how we work, because we do have these oppressive systems all over the world. I come from Germany, where we had only recently the Nazi regime and the DDR, the communist dictatorship. And so I feel both these systems were, of course, kept up because most people did not rebel. But they were not horrible people. And I wanted to understand what makes us sort of go along with something that's clearly harming us, because she has psychosomatic symptoms, she has horrible migraines, she can't sleep, she has physical, like heart palpitations. You can feel she's not happy, but she won't admit it because she needs her body to function perfectly. So as soon as she has a symptom, she wants to heal herself and get rid of it so that she can function perfectly again. She doesn't understand what her body is trying to tell her.
I want to come back to the body in a moment, but I wondered, Hitomi also is kind of like a precarious creative worker. I was thinking about the parallel to many of the young, frequently precarious people in the arts and many other fields where they are, they want to be in a big city, they want to be in the system, and therefore they actually end up selling out a lot. They work in the ad agencies because that's the only way in which they pay rent. And did you see her as the kind of a figure that young readers might identify with, because it's such an attractive path for all of us? I'll do just a little bit, just for 5 years, and then I'll start painting again, and all those lies that we tell.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you compare her to a creative worker, because she's not very creative.
No.
She's very sort of functioning. She has learned what she has to do, but the creativity sometimes sort of shows up within her, and it's very scary to her. There are a few moments where she doesn't function properly, and where she is being very creative. She actually has a few very good ideas, and those are the moments that show her humanity, and but what you mean is more sort of the precariousness of the worker. I think a lot of gig workers, like this economy, which of course creatives are part of that, I feel, or have become part of that, where you don't have any sort of security. You have to go from one job to the next, and you have to acquire as many jobs as possible. Hitomi has, besides this big case, she has another job at night where people from sort of professionals out of different companies call her up if they have psychological problems, and she's being paid by the bosses, the owners of the companies, to then fix them quickly and bring them back to work. So she's very much that type of person. And of course I thought of young people especially now, because it's such a harsh reality they're faced with. And I feel like we're being taught to be very unkind to ourselves as well, very strict with ourselves, very disciplined. Discipline is a big topic in the book, and I think we can identify with that. Yeah.
Right, because I think in particular when it comes to gig work, it's such a complicated thing to represent. When you think about there were the great 19th century novels about the working class. Naturalism, Zola, Germinal, gives you a sense of into a certain class. But gig work seems to be so nebulous, so hard to capture. In particular, the precarity of people like this who yo-yo between different jobs, and in particular because they have been sold this idea of freedom as well, that you are free in this, you are an entrepreneur of yourself.
Exactly.
But you're also free of security and health insurance and many nice other things.
Yeah.
But you mentioned also that indeed Hitomi is not very creative, and so the system optimization that we are also being sold nowadays, that will self-optimize and then will be creative, but it seems to stifle creativity in your book.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like the moments of sort of rebellion or a feeling of revolution in the book always have to do with art and creativity. There are moments, sort of the spaces in this world that still have sort of a little bit of freedom are these spaces, because what I love about art is that it's not productive. You cannot easily identify.
If there are politicians in this room, you didn't hear it. Art is really important. Please continue funding the arts.
Yeah, but it's not so goal-oriented. It's not even very product-oriented, I feel. It's, at least for most artists I know, and for me as well, it's more about the process. That's the most interesting, right? And of course, it's also great to then have a product, because this is also part of a market, and I'm part of the market, and I'm still struggling with that as a writer now. Of course, it's a little bit easier now that I'm my own employer, but it also comes with this old training of you have to be especially if you're on your own, you have to be even more disciplined, and you have to sit down and take it like an office job and really work hard. And I'm still struggling within myself between these different impulses.
So before you spoke about emotions, and I want to go back there, in particular the way in which we live in societies, in your book more than in our society, but I would say here now too, with a fear of negative emotions, and because they are such a force of disruption. I mean, we become unproductive when we're anxious, we're unproductive, especially when we're depressed. We are unproductive when we have multiple other disorders. And so nowadays there's a very easy solution. You go to a doctor and they give you a prescription.
Yes.
Because you can be chemically fixed. And it's very cost effective. You probably all know that in psychiatry in particular, most of the doctor visits last 10 minutes, and they are just the time in which a prescription is being filled for you. And so what do you think about this as a form of surveillance capitalism? And you didn't really talk about this medicalization of emotions very much in the book, but where does your book fit in that discourse?
I mean, I find it interesting that in Silicon Valley, medication is a huge topic. They're always finding other pills to make them more productive.
Or mushrooms,
or mushrooms, or microdosing. Yeah, they have all these ways of taking medication to enhance performance. I also want to say, because I myself suffer from depression, medication is useful.
Of course, I'm not saying it works.
But as a basis, and I agree that it has become much more sort of goal-oriented. It has to be fixed as soon as possible, and as quickly, and as easy, and as cheaply as possible, or as profitable as possible to the company. And that also applies to psychology, actually, which is a bigger topic in this book, because Hitomi is part of this psychology machine, right? It's a market. It's become a market. And that's something I see in our world as well. Through technology, and with the help of technology, we've become sort of obsessed with metrics and data, and sort of finding the best way to fix someone by data, which is not my personal experience how therapy works. And we now have apps that promise to be therapeutic. We even have AI you can talk to. So it's really become very disembodied. And in the book, we do still have a real person, but she never meets up with Riva. She never actually sits in one room with her. So it's all done through technology, because the belief is that that is more efficient, better, and quicker.
Because that obviously happens in our world as well, that as telemeetings show up, and indeed, I mean, I also have read research on the bots, the chatbots you can talk to. I haven't yet seen any suicide helplines that employ chatbots, but I'm sure somebody's
worked on them. They probably wouldn't tell you.
Yeah, but that this seems to be very much there. But the loss of, for you as a human being, as a writer, what does this loss of human connection in the therapeutic encounter or any other encounter of emotional, coming together, what does that mean for a society when we no longer have this apparatus for sensing the other, measuring the emotions?
I mean, the thing is, first of all, I think it's very detrimental, because we are a social animal, right? That's how we've actually come this far, by being social, very social creatures. But I feel it's not even that we're aware of losing this, because there's the simulation of closeness and of communication. There's so much virtual communication that sort of gives you the feeling of being close to others while not actually being close to others. And this image of the hikikomori, the Japanese term for a young man who stays in his room for the rest of his life just talking to people online, is like a very extreme image of that. But I think it's a very sort of apt image as well to where we're headed.
As you probably have read all the work by Sherry Turkle and other people who actually have done research on what happens to interpersonal communication when we no longer meet people, when we are used to communicating in short bursts of text in a very controlled environment. We know what the other, we have time to respond, and how there's supposedly already data to say that people have a harder time reading facial expressions in social interactions because they're used to, screen-to-screen communication as opposed to this, I think she's unhappy, I will not finish that sentence kind of a type of a thing.
Plus, the communication that we use goes through apps or through technology that has a clear goal, which is an economic goal. It's profit. So our speech, the way we communicate, is being influenced by the app we use. It has been shown that our communication has become much more extreme, much more radical, much more hateful, and that's because the companies behind these apps profit from us being extreme, radicalized, and because it keeps our attention in the app, right? That's the attention economy. That's the goal, to keep us within these technologies as long as possible. And so I think they started out, and when we think about Facebook, it started out as a real means for communication. It really was a meeting place in the beginning.
Even the rating system that Zuckerberg had, the rating stuff that he did in Harvard, that rate the hot women. Okay, never mind.
I'm not sure.
I really just like Mark Zuckerberg.
Yes,
so.
I think most people do. I mean, he also looks like a robot, so it's not even sure he's real. But I think the idea of Facebook in the beginning was like a positive idea. We use technology to enhance communication, and it did work. I think it's not the technology's fault that we're being isolated. It's the fault of the companies behind it, and it's a little bit our own fault of how we use it. But it's not the technology. So it was actually very good at enhancing communication, especially globally. I remember having, early on in Facebook, because I lived abroad a lot, I had so many more connections to the people I had met abroad than I would have had before, because it was just too difficult to keep in touch. So there was this positive idea of technology helping us communicate. And then the share button, the like button were invented, the concept of financing this through advertisement, and it all went to shit. And now we have not communication networks, but we have platforms to advertise, That's the main goal. And so communication is actually secondary, and it is one of the products. So they, of course, influence the product very heavily. They influence our language. They influence the way we relate to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I was actually thinking about the language that you use in the book as well, that the book feels cool. I hate to say, it's very subjective phrase, of course, but when you read it, it's like the book itself in style is cool. It's like a sleek surface to some extent. And did you consciously try to, keep it on the same style of that perfect world that we are looking at? That you also don't have these big emotional bursts, the melodrama, where you as the reader just, jump into deep adjectival pool, and so tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I really wanted to make the reader feel this world, like actually physically experience it. And of course, language is the only tool I have. So I wanted you to experience the coldness of this world through the language, and especially because it's told from Hitomi's perspective, who has become a robot, Of course, she has a very functional robotic way of relating to the world, and she uses a lot of, you can't tell in the English translation, but in the German original and also in the Estonian translation, there's a lot of English words that they use, English terms, and there's a lot of trademarked terms that have sort of become products as well. Which is, of course, the language of the internet, the language of technology is very English. And so I wanted the reader to really experience that while reading. Yeah.
Because it almost feels that, to some extent, this language of always being connected to others is a little bit simplified. When you look at the social media language used, I think vocabulary is limited, and especially the adjectival range becomes quite simple. just like good, bad. It's like simplified, and to some extent, this is it's very hard to write in a work of fiction because you want to convey this in a way that still captures the reader.
Which is why there are moments when it breaks down, the system breaks down, and the language also becomes more lively. And we do get a glimpse at Riva's language when we read her diaries, and there I could really play with the language much more, and it was much more sort of open, and that I really enjoyed that after being so controlled for
exactly, and I think that that's one of the beautiful parts of the text, that we in a literary work are able to use these different linguistic forms, and you have brought in addition to this narrator point of view, also the diaries and these other text types, so that the norm is broken, so to say, that we are reminded that there is an otherwise, that there is an other way of expression. Although this is a complicated and absurdly philosophical question, but do you really think that it is possible to be outside of your world? I mean, is this so controlling a world that there is no outside? We are really doomed.
No, I don't think we're doomed. I don't think we can be outside of our world, but that's not my goal. I think we have to change the system we're in, right? That's always something I have a problem with like narratives that say we just have to get out of the system, sort of be isolated in the woods, and then we're going to be happy. In the book, there is a space that seems sort of on the surface to be a little bit more free, which is the peripheries around the big city. The city is this glistening, beautiful thing where everybody wants to be, but you have to work your way up to the city. You are born into the peripheries, and you have to prove yourself through castings, through performing, to then make it into the city. And these peripheries seem a lot more free in a way. There's less surveillance, less technology, and the people seem to be a little bit less controlled. We see people who have different types of bodies, for example. But the reality is that it's not really a free world either, because everybody there, or almost everybody, wants to be in the city and is desperately trying. And the city also completely depends on the peripheries to supply the work that they don't want to do, right? That's the system we have now as well. We wouldn't be able to live without the slums, without the people who are living in poverty, who are doing the dirty work. To keep us in our glistening high-rise buildings. So I feel you cannot escape that, but you can make it crumble within the system.
So it's not like your narrative is not providing the simplified narrative in which the people in the peripheries will rise up and they will take down the bad people in the city.
No.
That is not going to be possible in this book, in this fictional universe. But let's ask about who are these people who run this universe. Like we see that everybody who is in this book, I mean, not a conspiracy theory here, like in this fictional universe, that we see everybody who is a victim of the system, who is surveilled, who is precarious, but who is keeping it in function? Who is running it?
Well, so I don't actually tell people what. I don't give a direct answer, but you can sort of like find out through reading that. To me, it is sort of a form of politics that we've not reached yet, but are on a good way to reaching, where the market is actually the governmental system. So the big companies, the most influential companies, are actually deciding the policies, which is already sort of the case when we look at the big tech giants and how they're not being regulated at all. But here, there's sort of the government, the official government is sort of missing. You have this direct influence which is more honest, I guess. But they're deciding what's good for people and what isn't. Yeah, and they're setting the trends.
Yeah. So something that does indeed look quite familiar, that adults have left the building and left us in the hands of the boys in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a very scary picture to me, at least, because there is, maybe this is kind of I'm going off the topic a little bit, but much of the Silicon Valley thinking used to be very utopian in some ways. When you think about Google's "Do No Evil" slogan and all of the
They actually cut that, though.
right, I know.
They don't have it anymore.
Well, because somebody pointed out that, but many of those dreams actually grow out of somewhat, if not anarchic, then at least libertarian views about freedom, self-realization, and so nowadays, of course, it has gone horribly wrong.
The question is, to me, because this "do no evil" and we want to do the best for the world and we want to make the world a better place, those are also like market slogans. They're very good for making people believe in you and making your company more attractive. So I feel it's also like a big part that you can tell that by how the big companies always latch onto discussions, debates that we have in society. Suddenly they're, not racist anymore and not discriminating against other people. But it's not really because they believe in it. It's because suddenly the trend is not to discriminate anymore, and then they get on that trend. But I do think that also there might be people in the beginning who have really high ideals, and they actually leave the building when they realize what's happening. Because, for example, OpenAI, the people who made that happen, who built the technology, actually left OpenAI and formed their own company because they realized that the owner of the company was not listening to their security concerns. Mm-hmm. A lot of people who have developed this amazing technology are the ones warning us about it, right? The same with Tim Berners-Lee, the founder of the internet, who's now going around and saying, people, this is not what the internet was supposed to be like. And they were it was supposed to be this utopian democratic haven, right? So I feel at some point when you make enough money or when you have the sense you're on the brink of becoming very, very rich and very influential, something happens to the human psyche and you just lose sort of sense of all ethics.
Well, the ethics part is very important, but I also feel that it's quite important to. I'm becoming increasingly pessimistic because I see that this information is out there. Consumers can educate themselves on the problems of tech companies, on surveillance, on the issues to do with self-surveillance, capitalism, everything, and we kind of just don't care. Because we still, even I have a cell phone somewhere, and we keep on using these tech tools. We know that they take out data. We go through the, every day, how many times do we tick the box, accept cookies? We just give away all kinds of stuff, and it seems like we haven't, as scientists, as scholars, as writers, managed to scare people enough. Or what do we do?
Well, the thing is that the tech companies, once again, of course, have all this research. They actually have their own researchers telling them, this is addicting kids, this is, breaking your brain, this is terrible for humans. And then they tell the researchers, well, this can't be true. And they continue on, and then they go and give it back to the users and say, it's your responsibility, right? And so I don't think it should be the responsibility of the users to work against this incredible system that is so much bigger than them and that you cannot fully comprehend. Like, the technology behind it, none of us here in this room probably understand it in detail. So I feel like the responsibility should be with the companies that develop it. And once they realize this is harming people, they should be forced to change the technology, which would be super easy, by the way. There are so many studies that show there's only small changes you have to make it less addictive, to make it less break your brain less and take so much of your attention. It's not that hard, but it's profitable, and that's why that narrative is also very convenient for the tech companies. It's your job. You're not doing well, when it has been proven that the mechanisms they trigger in our brains we cannot break them. Like you cannot control them. So it's not really fair, I feel, to put in. But also, I do think we should care about it more, and we should be more active in making the politicians see the problem and forcing these companies to change their.
While they still can.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because
while they're
that
still
window,
here.
because that window is closing.
Yeah.
But my final, very provocative question, so not intended as a serious critique of any sort, but to some extent, aren't writers also part of the co-optable system? Like, you produce a product that
Of
then
course.
can be sold to these people. We all hope that they will buy this book. Then people like I want them to buy a book called Higher Education, where we come and teach this book. So we also get a job. That we are also part of the system. That our critique has been fully co-opted, so to say. Or is there still wildness to fiction that we that fiction allows to break through the veneer of happy smiley faces?
Well, I think it is both. I think it is an economy, clearly, and I myself have to face up to that because I need to live and I need to make money, and so I need to somehow be part of that market. But I do step back from it as much as I can, like sort of very consciously, because I do think it doesn't help my creativity to think that way, because you suddenly think about the mainstream reader and you want to make them happy, and then it's not really real art anymore. I think that's what we have AI for now, to create these texts. But I also think that especially literature and the novel does have sort of something rebellious to them, because of the world we live in. We live in a world that's extremely fast, and that's extremely reduced, because most of the information we receive is from the internet, right? And it has to be quick and short. And the novel is such a slow and very extensive long medium where we have to really dive deeply into the topics with all their contradictions, because in the discourse, oftentimes these issues get reduced, right? You're pro-technology or anti-technology, which is ridiculous because, like I said, it's not the technology's fault. It's like, it's somewhere in between. We cannot live without technology, but it should be possible to critique some parts of it. And I feel like the novel is the perfect medium to think about the world, because it gives you so much time, also and so much empathy to other people who are different from you. A huge problem of our society right now is that we're being more and more, put apart. Yeah. And I consciously write characters that are not exactly like me, and I want to understand them, and I do understand them by the end of the book, and it really helps me to speak to others in a different way, in a much more respectful way, and a much more productive way, although I don't want to use that word, in a better, more helpful way. And it actually makes communication easier to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else, to think about the world in a different way. Especially a dystopia also gives you a little bit of distance to your own world. Sometimes that makes it easier to reflect. So I do feel the novel right now is sort of like we need it as a balance to the speed. Yeah.
And in addition to the slowness of the novel, there is also it always is individual, right?
Yes, exactly.
That in the case of many other media, you are, in more dispersed context, and you are fed many interpretations, whereas in the novel you are forced to encounter the words and build the worlds out of the words yourself, right?
And draw your own conclusions. And I feel we were talking about that in the beginning, do you have a solution? Do you have a recipe? And I think that's sort of what social media does. It gives you the answers, it gives you a recipe, it tells you how to live, what to do. And I don't think that that's very beneficial. I think we all have to draw our own conclusions and come to an individual answer. And of course, as you said, like the novel gives so much power to the reader. Yeah.
So I think that's a nice I like that as a,
Yeah.
the final word from our dialogue, because I promise that I will give a chance to people in the audience to ask questions as well. And we have a volunteer. Thank you.
Yes.
And we will get the microphone just in case for the translation. That's behind you.
Yeah.
Right there. Because we have the simultaneous translator, so they need to get the mic.
I think that in Berlin, there is a scene of startup companies working in technology, media, and ecology. And they have a leftist, critical of capitalism, political worldview, different from Silicon Valley, California, different from Chinese totalitarianism, which you didn't mention much. I think in Amsterdam, there has for a long time been a scene of net activism and ideas of peer-to-peer and democratization. So it's not only, Tim Berners-Lee, people in the 90s who dreamed of a cyber culture. So I think the task of Europe is to develop digital and virtual and cyber technologies in emancipatory, anti-capitalist, post-capitalist directions as alternatives to the California and the Chinese implementations.
Yes.
And it can come from the European Union financing such projects. It can also come from radical technology companies with explicitly anti-capitalist and post-capitalist. So as you said very well, it's not being anti-technology. I felt critical of the steering of the conversation by you, because I feel a lot of just visceral anti-technology. And what you said, I also felt, where is really literature and art in this? I think it's amazing and admirable how well spoken you are as a social psychologist, as a media theorist, as a political analyst, all of that. It's very unusual to hear that, because usually a novelist or an artist is not a very lucid commentator on their own work, and we leave that open to interpretations. And I felt, to me, what was missing from this, I felt I'm sitting in a media theory seminar of Marshall McLuhan or Neil Postman or Sherry Turkle or Shoshana Zuboff. So, to me, I mean, what I really wanted to ask you is like, because it's sort of like theory, you're very, very into what I would call theory in addition to fiction. So how do you think about, experimental fiction in way like theory dash fiction? How would you write? Because I feel the way that you've talked today, I haven't read the novel, so I'm a handicapped in this discussion, but like the way that you talk about it, and then the writerly force of your novel, I cannot reconcile the two, because you're such a coherent commentator on your own work that it defies how I usually think about art and the novel. So.
Wow, that's interesting. I don't think I agree. There's a lot of writers who I admire exactly for their outspokenness. Margaret Atwood is a very good example for that. She is sort of a very political, analytical person, and at the same time very entertaining in her writing. And she's a bit of an idol of mine. But to me, I mean, what you say, what was really important for me personally, I come originally from a journalistic background. I was working in television, in nonfiction, and I thought about writing something more theoretical, or like an essay. But I feel fiction gives you so much less limitation and so much more ways to actually emotionally catch people or like emotionally speak to people. And that is something that's sometimes missing from the theory, because it's very easy to sort of think about these things and understand them, but then in your own body, in your own daily life, it's very hard to relate to it. And for me, writing the book was really, did achieve that for me, and I hope for the reader as well. Maybe I should read one more excerpt. I don't know if we have time, but to give a little bit of a sense.
Maybe we can take some more questions from the audience, because we are going to be kicked out of here in 15 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But just so, yeah.
So I will counteract the previous question in a way that I think I have read the book, so I have advantage here. Is that what is fascinating while reading this book is that going along with Hitomi, you actually want her to succeed. And that is a really weird, twisted momentum, because you know this is wrong, but you still want her to get her project done, because we are so trained in the society to get a stamp on it and then go to the next one. So maybe as a question now is how you manage to do that with us readers, how you get us along to this journey.
It's a very interesting question. I feel like much of the work is done by the reader. Like, I think readers are often very empathetic. I mean, reading has become sort of like a side thing. Books are not the main medium anymore, and I feel like literature really attracts like a special kind of people. But of course, I also went through that process when I wrote the book, and as I said, I tried to really get into the skin of the person. And I did also live it to a certain extent, right? In my former life, before I became a writer, I was on that track for a long time, in that hamster wheel of wanting to be better every day. And so I could really relate to that as well. And so I tried to put that into the character. Yeah.
It was a really interesting reading for me, and one question that I had was about the psychological side, and the fact that in that dystopian world, the person, well, they said that childhood doesn't matter in your psychological side or whatever, and that you, like, a person doesn't like develop. That the development in the childhood isn't the most important part. And why did you choose to like ignore the psychological theories right now that say that a person's development in childhood is the most important part?
Well, first of all, thank you for reading the book. You clearly read the book very well. So this was like a twist on psychology that was similar to thinking about what could capitalism do to family systems. I was also thinking, what can capitalism do to psychology and to therapy and to sort of the thinking about the psyche? If you think about it in only economic terms, then the performance in the now is much more important than your background and your family, the family you grew up with. And because the society also tries to standardize childhood and sort of have everybody grow up in the exact same way, with no real relationship with like an adult or anything like that, like there's nothing anymore sort of that would be individual about it. So they say it's not important. But I hope that the book shows, sort of demonstrates the opposite, because you can feel, even though Hitomi says this and believes this, you can feel in herself, she's constantly going back to her past. She's remembering she grew up with in this institution and was sort of indoctrinated from an early age. But she had a roommate in this institution who was her best friend. They were very, very close. It was her, you could say, her first and only love. And she lost this person, and she constantly thinks of her and goes back to her childhood and thinks about her growing up in this institution. So the book itself sort of demonstrates that it's not true, right? And I feel with a lot of the theory within the book, it's sort of being demonstrated at the same time, or like subverted in a way, what they think. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. People want to see things black and white. I don't want to see black and white. I want to see all the 50 shades of grey and even more. If utopia is 0% and dystopia, whatever it can be, is 100%, how you see how you see and perceive your current reality and why? And more important, how has it changed when you started writing the book?
Oh, mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Interesting. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I really agree with your analysis of the black and white being a problem. I think that's also something enforced by social media to sort of push the narratives that are very black and white and very not very diverse. And that is something that has intensified since I wrote the book, and that has become the topic of my second novel. My second novel is already published. It was published 2 years ago, and it deals much more with this type of black and white narratives. It's about a conspiracy theorist who starts manipulating a young girl into becoming a sort of iconic figure for his theories. So I think that my interest has shifted a little bit towards that, exactly what you were talking about, because I feel that's becoming more important now, or like a new aspect of what I was describing in the book. And I'm also, of course, very interested in artificial intelligence and the development there. That wasn't quite as far when I wrote the book. Although it does take, it is an important part of the book, yeah.
Do you think world has become more dystopian or utopian?
Work?
From start of the book to the end of the book.
You mean work?
World.
Word.
World. Universe.
Oh, the world, sorry.
Yeah.
That's a very good question.
We had COVID.
Yeah. It did feel very dystopian. Yeah. You also mentioned that in the beginning, that there's so many aspects of our lives that feel dystopian. And the pandemic definitely added to that. I think climate change also is constantly adding to it and is becoming more and more visible. And so in a way that's good, because it has been a dystopian thing for a long time, but it wasn't really perceived like as that. So in a way, people becoming more aware of the dystopia is also a positive thing, because I don't think that the world is at a horrible place in general. I do think we've made big strides in many ways. For example, me, like, I grew up in a very non-gendered, I mean, not enough, but, you know, like non-gendered, sort of trying not to be discriminatory world, which wasn't possible 100 years ago. So I really benefit from a lot of positive developments, and I'm especially a big fan of the youngest generation. I feel they have such a great understanding of the world, of technology, and I really put a lot of hope in them. They seem very sort of also activist, much more than my generation. They seem to really want to change things, like also physically, not just digitally. And so in that way, I do feel a utopian sense as well, but it's always sort of shifting. And dystopias have always been popular, right? Like in the history of literature and of art, there have always been dystopias. Yeah.
Do we have another question? Because otherwise we can also give the chance for people who are interested in Julia's autograph, talking to her personally, to get a chance. Remember, Thomas is standing there by the door. You can buy an invaluable Estonian resource if you want to read the translation, and use this opportunity. The conversation will continue. The great Futurological Congress will be here, and today the following speaker is going to continue talking about the shittification of the internet, so that if you don't know about this, then stick around. But thank you once again for Julia for her very great comments.
Thank you, Miley, for your great questions. Thank you.